Now, the children of God were molded by the hand of God, which is called on, and it manifested according to their desires. For all things that have life are molded by on. The fox, shivering in the cold lands, longs for warmth, and so its cubs have coats. The owl, clumsy in the dark, longs to see its prey more clearly, and in generations of longing, the desire is granted. On makes everything what it is, for all things change under its law. Men, too, are molded by their desires, but unlike the beasts and birds, their yearnings are circumscribed by the laws of fate and destiny and the law of sowing and reaping. These, the desires, modified by the laws, are called intrépides. Unlike the beasts and birds, this, in man, is something relating to him rather than to his offspring, though they are not untouched by it. Destiny may be likened to a man who must travel to a distant city, whether or not he wishes to make the journey, the destination being his destiny. He may choose whether to go by way of a river or by way of a plain, whether across mountains or through forests, on foot or horseback, slow or fast, and whatever befalls because of this decision is fate. If a tree falls on him because he chose the forest path, it was fated, for luck is an element of fate. Destiny leaves no choice, fate gives limited choice which may be good or bad, but it cannot be averted. What is fated must be, for at no point can there be any turning back. The circumstances, intrépides, of the traveler conform to the law of sowing and reaping. He may travel in comfort or pain, happily or sorrowfully, with strength or weakness, heavily burdened or lightly burdened, well prepared or ill prepared. When the destination is set according to the degrees of a former life, then the circumstances of the journey should conform with the desire. For what use is it desiring a great destination when the law of sowing and reaping decrees that an intolerable burden must be carried on the way? Far better to have lesser aspirations. The decrees of fate are many, the decrees of destiny are few. When the earth was young and the race of man still as children, there were fertile, green pastures in the lands where all is now sand and barren wasteland. In the midst of it was a gardenland, which lay against the edge of the earth, eastward towards the sun rising, and it was called Meruah, meaning the place of the garden on the plain. It lay at the foot of a mountain, which was cleft at its rising, and out of it flowed the river of Tardana, which watered the plain. From the mountain, on the other side, ran the river Cal, which watered the plain through the land of Caldan. The river Nara flowed westward and then turned back to flow around the gardenland. It was a fertile place, for out of the ground grew every kind of tree that was good for food and every tree that was pleasant to the sight. Every herb that could be eaten and every herb that flowered was there. The tree of life, which was called Glacier, having leaves of gold and copper, was within the sacred enclosure. There, too, was the great tree of wisdom bearing the fruits of knowledge, granting the choice and ability to know the true from the false. It is the same tree, which can be read as men read a book. There also was the tree of trespass, beneath which grew the lotus of rapture, and in the center was the place of power, where God made his presence known. Time passed, and the children of God were grown strong and upright under the tempering hammer of God, and earth, the anvil of God, became more kindly. All was pleasant and food plentiful, but life palls in such places, for it is against the nature of man to flourish in these circumstances. Earth is not for pleasurable dallying, it is a place of teaching, trial and testing. The children of God were not yet the heirs of God, nor inheritors of godhood, but there was one among them who had almost completed the pilgrimage of intrépides. He had unraveled the tangled skeins of fate and traversed the tumultuous seas of life to the many ports of destiny, and having paid the debts of sowing and reaping, was one triumphant over intrépides. He was Fanvar, son of Amma and Adam. He was wise and knew all things. He beheld mysteries and the secret things hidden from the eyes of other men. He saw sunrise and the sunsetting in their splendor, but longed for things not realizable in the place where he lived. So because he walked with God, he was culled out from his kind and brought to Meruah, the garden place. He came to it across the mountains and wastelands, arriving after many days' journeying. Weary and close to death because of the privations he suffered, he could just reach the refreshing waters, from which he drank deeply, and filled with exhaustion, he slept. In his sleep, he dreamed, and this was the manner of his dreaming. He saw before him a being of indescribable glory and majesty, who said, "I am the God above all, even above the God of your people. I am that which fulfills the aspirations of men, and I am that in which they are fulfilled. You, having traversed all the circles of Enidvedu and established your worthiness, are now made my governor on earth, and you shall rule all things here, guiding them in my ways, leading them ever upwards into glory. This will be your labor and, behold, here is your reward." A cloud mist seemed to gather about the glorious being, enfolding him so he was no longer visible. Then, the mist gradually cleared, and the man saw another form emerging. It was that of a woman, but one such as Fanvar had never seen before, beautiful beyond his conception of beauty, with such perfection of form and grace that he was dumbfounded. Yet, the vision was not substantial. She was a wraith, an ethereal being. The man awoke and sought food from the fruits about him and, having refreshed himself, wandered about the garden. Wherever he went he saw the wraith, but was unafraid because she smiled encouragingly, bringing comfort to his heart. He built himself a shelter and grew strong again, but always, wherever he went, the wraith was not far distant. One day, near the edge of the garden, he fell asleep in the heat of the day and awoke to find himself surrounded by the sons of Botaz, not true men but yoslings, kinsfolk to the beasts of the forest. Before they could take his strength and wisdom, he loosed himself among them, slaying some in his rage and might before the rest ran away. When it was done, he sat himself down beneath a great tree, for he was wounded and blood gushed out from his side and gathered thickly beside him. He became faint, falling into a deep sleep, and while he slept, a wondrous thing happened. The wraith came and lay beside him, taking blood from his wound upon herself so it congealed about her. Thus, the spirit being became clothed with flesh, born of congealing blood, and being sundered from his side, she rose a mortal woman. In his heart, Fanvar was not at rest, because of her likeness, but she was gentle, ministering to him with solicitude, and, being skillful in the ways of healing, she made him whole. Therefore, when he had grown strong again, he made her queen of the gardenland, and she was so called even by our fathers, who named her Gula, but Fanvar called her Arua, meaning helpmate. In our tongue, she is called the Lady of Lanavid. Now, God enlightened Fanvar concerning the woman, saying, "This woman was drawn from her compatible abode in a realm of beauty through the yearning aspirations of men. Her coming accomplishes something, which would otherwise have taken countless generations, for earth is more fitting for men to learn manly things than for women to learn womanly ones. This woman is not as other women, being in no way like yourself. Every hair of her head is unlike that of a man, every drop of blood and every particle of flesh is that of a woman and quite unlike that of a man. Her thoughts and desires are different. She is neither coarse nor uncouth, being altogether of another, more refined realm. Her daughters will walk proudly, endowed with every womanly perfection and grace. Delicacy, modesty and charm will be the lovely jewels enhancing their womanliness. Henceforth, man will be truly man, and woman will be truly woman, men being girded with manliness and women clothed with womanliness. Yet they shall walk together, hand in hand, towards the ascending glory before them, each the helpmate and inspiration of the other. So Fanvar and Arua lived in contentment amid bounty and fruitfulness, with freedom from afflictions and sickness. They delighted in each other and, because of their differences, were drawn closer together. Arua brought but one thing with her when she crossed the misty frontier, the treasure of Lanavid, the jewel contained in the Munchalis, the stone of inspiration fashioned by the desires of men. Never owned by any but the daughters of Arua, this, the Len-Gil, Arua gave to Fanvar as her dowry and her pledge of purity and exclusiveness. She followed the ways of the cradle land, not the ways of earth. Within the gardenland was the sacred enclosure, the domain of Fanvar and Arua, forbidden to those of the children of God who had now come to this place. It contained the chalice of fulfillment, granting any who drank from it the realization of all things to which they aspired. None might drink from this, save Fanvar and Arua. Also, there was the cauldron of immortality, containing an essence distilled from the fruits growing in the garden, and this guarded against mortal ills. Arua brought forth a son by Fanvar, and he was called Ratoki, and a daughter who was called Armina. Each knew the mysteries of magic and the ways of the stars. In the fullness of time, Ratoki married among the daughters of the sons of God and had 2 sons, Enanari and Nenduka. It was Enanari who first taught the weaving of cloth from plants, and Nenduka was a mighty hunter. Armina also married among the sons of God and brought forth a son who was called Belenki and daughters called Ananua and Mamita. Ananua knew the making of pots and things of clay, and Mamita the taming of beasts and birds. Nenduka had 2 sons, Namtara and Canaan. Namtara had 2 sons also, Nenduka and Datam, before dying in the fullness of manhood. Belenki married Anidva and had a son called Enkijua and a daughter called Astartha, meaning maid of the morning, and she became a great teacher among the children of God. This was the Astartha who became the first moon maiden, being later called Lady of the Morning Star. Enkijua had a daughter, and her name was Mava. Outside the sacred enclosure, known as Jazar, but forming a gateway into it was a circular structure of stones called Gilgal, and within this was a shrine, wherein was kept a sacred vessel called Gwenduva. This was like a goblet and was made of rainbow-hued crystal set in gold with pearls. Above the cup appeared a shimmering moon-colored mist like a thin, cold flame. At certain times, when the heavens were in a proper position, the Gwenduva was filled with moondew and potions from the cauldron within the sacred enclosure, making a pale honey-colored liquor, and this the people drank from the goblet. However, there were different proportions in the vessel for those of the blood of Fanvar and Arua, and those who were children of God, but not of their blood. It was the potion from the Gwenduva which kept sickness and disease away from those who drank it. Datam the first father married Letha, and they had a son called Herthu. Datam then married Mava who had a daughter, not by him, and this was Gweneva, the cuckoo child fathered by Abriminate of Gwarthan, son of Namtenagal, whom we call Lud the Dark Father. About the land of the children of God was the wasteland where Yoslings, called the children of Zumit, which means they who inherit death, dwelt. Amongst these, Namtenagal, the wily hunter, was the most wise and cunning. He alone was unafraid of the children of God, and he alone dared enter the gardenland. In the days when Astartha was teaching, Namtenagal often came to hear her words, and the children of God were not displeased, for teaching the wild men about them was a duty with which they had been charged. Namtenagal, therefore, participated in their rites but could not partake of the elixir from the Gwenduva, because this was forbidden. While it gave health and strength to the children of God, safeguarding them from the sicknesses of the Yoslings, if given to others, it caused a wasting away. It was also altogether forbidden for any of the children of God to mate with the yoslings, for this was deemed to be the most unforgivable of sins. Now, the wily one learned much from Astartha and, in the fullness of time, brought his own son to her, and he became as her son, living in her house and forsaking the ways of his people. Astartha called him Luid the Lightbringer, for it was her intention that he should be taught the ways of those who walked in light, that he might in time enlighten his own people. Luid grew up tall and handsome, he was quick to learn and became wise. He was also a man of the chase, strong and enduring, a hunter of renown. But there were times when the call of his people was strong, then he would go out furtively into the night to indulge in their dark rituals. Thus, he became knowledgeable in the ways of the flesh and in the carnal indulgences of the body. Datum became a servant of the sacred enclosure, where the misty veil between the realms could be penetrated, for all those having the blood of Arua had twin sight, an ability to see wraiths and Sith folk, Ansies and spirit beings, all the things of the other world, not clearly, but as through a veil. Beside the place called Jazar was a pleasant parkland with trees of every kind and a stream, also thickets of flowering bushes and all manner of plants growing lushly. It was the custom of Maeva to wander there in the sunshine, and Luid also went there, so it came about that they met among the trees. Maeva knew the man but had shunned him in the past. Now, she saw he was handsome, possessed of many attractions, so her foot was stayed, and she did not run away. As the days passed they dallied longer together, and Luid talked of things Maeva had not heard before. She felt a stirring in her blood, but did not respond or heed his temptations, because of the things that were forbidden. So Luid went to the Moon Mother, wise woman of the yoslings, and telling of his desires, beseeched her to help him. The Moon Mother gave him 2 apples containing a vile substance, which they had drawn through their stalks. This Luid gave to Maeva, who then became helpless in his hands. They met again after this, for Maeva became enamored towards Luid, but it happened that she became ill with a strange sickness and was afraid. Then Datum became ill, and Luid also, and Luid said to the woman, "You must obtain the pure essences from within the sacred enclosure, and Satina, the Moon Mother, will prepare an elixir which will cure us." This he said because none of his kind had ever been able to obtain the sacred substances, though they had always coveted what had been denied them. Now, because of her frailty, the woman was pliable in his hands, and Luid seized the opportunity. To achieve his ends, Luid gave Maeva a potion which had been prepared by the Moon Mother, and she administered this to Datum and those with him, by guile and deceit, so that they fell asleep. While they slept, Maeva stole from the sacred substances and took them to Luid, who gave them to the Moon Mother, and she made a brew. Part of this was given to Maeva, and the rest was drunk by the yoslings, from their awful ankle markings, brandings, during their night rites. When the morning came, they were all smitten with grievous pains, and before the sun set that day, all the yoslings were stricken with a sickness, such as they had not known before. Maeva took what had been given to her and, finding Datum, laid low in his bed, gave him a draught from her vessel, though she had to use womanly wiles to get him to drink it. She drank the remainder, and they both slept. But when they awoke in the morning, both were suffering pains, and this was something they had not known before. Datum said to the woman, "What have you done? For what has happened to us cannot be unless the things which are forbidden have been done." The woman replied, "Lord, I was tempted, and I fell. I have done that which is forbidden and unforgivable." Datum said, "I am bound by duty to do certain things, but first let us go into the Jazar to the place called Beth Kelchris, where I will seek enlightenment." So they went there together and stood before the shrine beneath the tree of wisdom. There, they were filled with an inflowing vision, seeing themselves as they were and as they should have been, and they were ashamed. because he had not followed the proper path of a man, and she, because of her falsity. There, in the reflecting mist, the contamination of the woman was revealed, and the man's heart shriveled within him like a flower licked by flame. Then, they saw a great spirit being materializing in the reflecting mist, and he said to them, "Woe to you and your house, for the greatest of evils has befallen the race of the children of God, and it is defiled. The heritage of Kodam Hapa is lost." The fetid flow defiling the woman results from the incompatible intermingling, but it is not all, for sicknesses and diseases are also generating from the ferments of the impure implantation. Adam said, "The fault is with the woman, wherefore should I suffer?" The spirit being replied, "Because you two are now as one, the cankerworms of disease and sickness strike both equally, but you shall not again defile this place." Henceforth, the misty veil becomes an impenetrable barrier severing our two realms from each other, so they can no longer be easily spanned. Between us, there will now be no means of communication. Henceforth, man and woman, fated to unite in love divine, shall be divided and set apart, though ever yearning reunion. They may cleave one to the other, seeking the unity, which will rekindle the flame, but unless their efforts transcend the limitations of earthly things, they will be in vain. The spirit of man is now severed from the whole and cast again into unconsciousness, and it too shall long for reunion with the whole. The spark shall seek to return to the fire, for otherwise, it becomes nothing. The web of fate is rewoven and the paths of destiny remade, the design of life is redrawn, again. The progression begins in ignorance, birth and death, pain and pleasure, joy and sorrow, success and failure, love and hate, peace and war, all the light and shade, the many hues making the splendidly intricate pattern of life on earth. This is a new beginning, but a beginning not in purity and unencumbered, but one already weighted with debts and burdens. The spirit being continued, "Enough wickedness has been wrought by your willfulness and disobedience, for the decrees forbidding certain things were for your own benefit. Immortality was nearly within your reach, but had you achieved this, you would have brought an even more grievous evil upon yourselves and your inheritors, for freed from servitude to change, you and they would have been unable to progress." The children of God were driven out of the gardenland by spirit beings, and then guardians were set at its gates so none could re-enter. Then, it was withdrawn beyond the misty veil, the waters ceased to flow, and the fertility departed, only a wilderness remained. The children of God went to dwell in the land of Ammonigel, which is beyond the mountains of Mashur by the sea of Dalamuna. From this time onward, man fashioned his own spirit-likeness. Some, who were loathsome in aspect even unto themselves, went apart and were mercifully veiled in dark depths, and they said among themselves, "Let us dwell here in the darkness and prepare a place for others like ourselves, so that when they follow, they abide here and join us." Thus, were the dark regions formed and inhabited by demons who are not but the hideously fashioned spirits of evil men. These things have been written into the record. In Siboid, they used to say this was the manner of man's making. God sent his creating craftsman's spirit down to earth, and the reflection of the one was drawn into a spiritless body, and this became the heart of man. These are the words written by Thonis of Myra and Laodicea in his day. You ask me what is man, and I answer, he is life becoming aware of itself. He is the intangible knowing the tangible, spirit and matter, fire and water. When this first happened, none remembers, and only the old folk tales remain. There was the beginning and then the garden, and it was in this garden man found himself. Before this he was not free, being one with everything about him. As he could not disobey, good and evil could not be, they were non-existent. Man became free through awareness of himself, and with this knowledge, denied any kinship with the beast. as he was no longer in harmonious relationship with things of the earth, he became discontented, dissatisfied and restless. He wanted to belong, but felt his place of belonging was not there. He had been reborn as a man-god, and therefore, it is truly said that man was born of earth and spirit, under a tree, the symbol of life, and in a garden. There the eyes of the man and woman were opened, and, being above the beasts, they knew they were different and set apart from all else that breathed. They separated themselves, being now ashamed of their state and strangers to each other. The carnal satisfaction of lesser creatures now no longer sufficed. They had lost contact with the source of love, but, though knowing something was lacking, knew not what. They had fallen into carnal knowledge which only man can know, for only he feels the reproach of divinity. They were removed from the garden of content by an inhalation of the divine substance and could not return because of the barrier between man and non-man. Kamalek has written, "The entwined were cut apart and since that day have never known content. They wander restlessly, ever seeking to unite again and together find the jewel, which is lost to earth forever." Lupasus has written, "This first woman, who came from the void, is the eternally glorified goddess, the inspirer of hearts, the ideal of womanhood honored by all men, the priestess at the shrines of delicacy and tenderness. She was the ideal woman who, because of man's nature, is always tempted by his twin shade, the beast in his form. If the beast triumphs and she falls, the ideal becomes enshrouded in winding cloths of disillusionment, and something is lost to the heart of a man." These words are also there. They did not partake of wisdom, and fruit from the tree of knowledge is bitter. Men are denied their true birthright. The fall of man was a fall from loving contact with God into material carnality. The soul that had shared the consciousness of God fell into unconsciousness by becoming ensnared in matter. The fall severed man from the source of his spiritual sustenance. Thereafter, his efforts were to struggle back. In his blind groping for God, after the fall, he discovered demons and found it easier to worship them than to continue the search. God is always waiting, man is only to look up, but it is easier to go down the hill than to climb it. It is easier for man's spiritual beliefs to degenerate than to evolve. Who among men knows the truth and can write with certain knowledge? Would not this certainty be against the law? No man was there at the beginning to see and write, but of one thing alone we can be sure, the creating God knows how and why, and could the acts of one so great be without purpose?